Seán Cole and Alfred Colley were both from Dublin's North Inner City. Both were senior officers in the Éireann at the time of their summary execution. These young patriots were returning from a meeting on August 25th, 1922, when they were abducted by Free State forces on the North Strand as they came home from a meeting that had taken place in Marino. And they were brought up here, which was then an isolated field. And they were summarily executed. Those that killed them were part of a shadowy intelligence unit from within the Free State Army. Spooks, by any other name. And if witnesses hadn't actually seen the fact that they had Free State uniforms on under their coats, it might never have been known who killed them. The timing of their death is important too. They were killed just 3 days after Michael Collins was killed at Belle de Blanc, Cork. And it was part of a series of retaliations that were carried out by the Free State forces. And when I was asked to speak at this today, I just was doing a little bit of research on Cole and Colley. And what jumped out at me immediately was their age. Like Seán Cole was only 17. Alfie Colley was 18. And then when you think about it, you know, that isn't actually that unusual or that unique in terms of our Republican struggle. If you went back a century before these young men to 1803, Robert Emmet, the famous great Robert Emmet, he was only 25 years of age. Kevin Barry again died in the North Inner City, 18 years of age. Of the 1981 hunger strikes, seven of them were 25 or younger. And in the last phase of armed struggle, those that brought the war to England in the mid-90s, Patricia Black, she was only 18, and Ed O'Brien was only 21. What they all had in common, they're all under 25 and they gave their lives for freedom. And at many key points in the struggle for Irish freedom, for national freedom, for economic freedom, for social freedom, it has been young men and women that have made up the bulk of the fighting forces, willing to sacrifice their lives for the greater good so that their families, their communities and their country could be free. And it's always risky to speculate about what might have been or might not have been when you're talking about historical events. But I believe that out the bravery, determination and vision of generations of young people, and sometimes very young people, the Republican struggle would in all likelihood have withered on the vine. Without young people like Cole and Colley, who answered Ireland's call in their thousands, generation after generation, the Tan War, for example, would probably not have achieved the limited freedom that it did achieve. If there wasn't young men, 17, 18, 19-year-olds, men and women, willing to take up arms and defend the Republic during that period, there is every chance that this city would still be under direct rule from Westminster. Now, sometimes our enemies, they claim that the likes of Cole and Colley, they were too young to know their own minds, that they were manipulated by older, more cynical armchair generals. This isn't true. Of course, an 18-year-old doesn't have the life experience of a 28 or 38 or 48 or 58-year-old. How could they? They're only 18. But that doesn't mean that they don't know injustice when they see it, and they don't know when it's time to fight. And in many ways, younger people, of the age that these two young men were, in many ways, they're the most suitable guardians of the Republic. Not this 26-county banana republic, the Republic of 1916. They are the most suitable guardians because they are young, they are idealistic, they haven't been tainted by cynicism and betrayal and indecision, which often plague older generations. So standing here in 2012, it is impossible to pinpoint the exact factors which drove Cole and Colley to join the struggle 90 years ago. But you can gain a general insight by looking at the Ireland they grew up in. You know, when you think about it, go back to what their experiences that they had that brought them to the point that they got involved in the struggle. In 1911, when Cole and Colley were just children, the British King visited Dublin. And he was met by a mixture of cheering supporters and protesters. And the protests were led by who? Countess Markievicz and James Connolly. Markievicz, who went on to play such an important role in bringing the Fianna to the point that the likes of Cole and Colley became involved in it. When the Great Lockout took place, Cole and Colley could not have ignored it. They were only kids, but it was a massive event, and they were North Inner City Dublin kids. And that's where the lockout most directly affected, was those communities in the North and South Inner Cities. It must have impacted on their development, on the way they saw the world. And when the two lads were roughly 12 years of age, they and the rest of this great Republican city would have witnessed the week-long Easter Rising and the executions that followed, and then the frantic building of revolutionary forces, the frantic building of a resistance movement that followed 1916. And when the first shots of the Tan War were fired, it's safe to speculate that these two young teens had seen all they needed to know to make an informed decision, to make an adult decision, despite their age, that they wanted to join the fight for freedom for their country, but also freedom from the slum landlords and the tenements, and freedom from the bosses of the lockout. How dare anyone, any intellectual in the Irish Times, any so-called historians, how dare they say the children that grew up in a North Inner City full of privation and desperation of the tenements, where the bosses and the landlords, their word was gospel. How dare anyone say that those children did not have the right to rebel? And how dare anyone say that young men and young women of the same age, of 17, of 18, of 19, of 20 years of age, today do not also have the right to rebel in the same way that Cole and Colley had that right? Now, we can't talk about Cole and Colley without recognising the reality that they came into the prime of their political activism, young as they were, at a time of division, when the treaty had caused a great split within the Republican movement, when former comrades had turned their guns on each other. But that reality did not deter them. They did not go home because Collins and company had sold out the struggle. No, they continued their duties. They attempted to reorganise and rebuild the Fianna so that it could play its part in protecting the Republic that was then under attack from the forces of reaction. And there's a lesson for all of us here today, young and old alike. We cannot allow ourselves to become demoralised or embittered because former comrades have now accepted the status quo. In fact, more now than ever, when Britain continues to occupy the 6 counties and the Troika is in occupation of the 26 counties, we need people like Cole and Colley, energetic young people who understand that it will take time and a great amount of energy to reorganise and rebuild. But there is no other choice, and that is what we must do. And in fact, that is what we are already doing. Today marks the 90th anniversary of the executions of Cole and Colley. The civil war that raged on into 1923 marked the end of a tumultuous decade for this country. A decade which began with the 1913 lockout, included the 1916 rising, the 1918 election, the establishment of the First Dáil, the Tan War, and then the Civil War. All massive events in their own right. Now, over the next 10 years, each of these events are going to be commemorated and celebrated. And those that commemorate and celebrate them will fall into 2 categories. There's going to be the official establishment commemorations, not celebrations. There'll be commemorations. The great and the good will parade up and down O'Connell Street and talk about what important events these were. But they will attempt to sterilise these events as historical events which have no context, no relevance today. The other type of commemoration that there will be celebrations. And they'll be organised by people like us, by progressive people. People's commemorations, not the state commemorations, not the commemorations of the establishment, but celebrations by people, by working class people across this country. Celebration of 1916, that is the word for it, to celebrate the bravery, the courage, the integrity of those people who struck a blow for freedom. And along with those people's commemorations and those people's celebrations, there will be questions. Questions the political establishment cannot answer. Where is the Republic of 16? Where is the nation that would cherish all the children of the nation equally? These are questions they cannot answer and they will not answer. But it is our job to keep asking that question, to present that question to the ordinary people, to the working class people, to people who aren't part of the great and the good. This state is a failure. It has failed on every count. It has existed for 90 years to serve the interests of various interests. At times the interests of the Catholic Church, at times the interests of the landlord class, at times the interests of the political dynasties, at times the interests of the elite, the Tony O'Reillys and the Dennis O'Briens. This state has never served the interests of working class people like Cole and Colley. That is the question that we have to ask. Why has it not? And how can we go about building a republic, a true republic, an all-Ireland republic, a socialist republic, which would protect the interests and the natural resources of the people and use the resources of this great country for the benefit of all of its people? Cole and Colley are not remembered by the political establishment for one reason. They took the wrong side in the Civil War, as the political establishment sees it. And they weren't important. They're only 2 kids. What do they matter? The truth is, young lads like Cole and Colley were the backbone of the Republican struggle. There would have been no Michael Collins or Eamon de Valera without young men and young women who were willing to go out and fight and die for the Republic. And that is why they need to be remembered. There'll be plenty of memorials for the big names, the important people in history. Commemorations like today are important because they remember people who were the backbone of the struggle. Ordinary young fellas from the inner city who saw injustice all around them and took a decision to fight. And what today has been a people's tribute. Not organised with big money or big fanfare. Ordinary working class dubs coming together to remember 2 other working class dubs. And a couple of people from Wicklow as well. We remember these young men because they knew right from wrong. They knew when it was right to stand up. They knew when it was right to fight. And unfortunately, they knew when it was right to take a stand that would lead to their own deaths. They are 2 young men that inspire us to this day. Remaigah.
Remaigah Brian. Son Éirígí bhálam ar muile buíochas a gháileh as a bheithan seolin in you agus muidir brachtáil an Commemoration.